This lesson is using Handlebars.js for HTML templating. The objectives for this lesson are to understand the concept of templating, familiarize yourself with Handlebars.js, set up Handlebars.js on your system, utilize expressions and helpers to manage dynamic content generation, format the data that will be generated using custom helpers. If you watched my previous lesson in this module, you'll understand this next concept, but I'm going to talk about storing HTML with tags into the HTML template element. We're going to assign an ID attribute to this template element, in this case called template, and we're going to set the type attribute to text/HTML. Inside of this template, you can put whatever HTML you want, and what's nice is we'll get color coding and all of that in our editor, but you then add tags or tokens, whatever you want to call them, but you can see that here in the value. We start with 2 open curly braces followed by a variable name and then 2 closing curly braces. And our job is going to be to replace that name with some value. So you read the template into a variable. We perform a search and replace on the tags with that real data. I'm saying we, but we're actually going to use handlebars to do that. So you're going to have that data with that name in there, and then we're going to put it into that template token. So we're going to do that by running it through, in this case, the Handlebars templating engine, which will then spit out that real data, young Frankenstein in this instance. Now, people used to do this with the script element. You still had to set the type attribute, but it wasn't really clear what the script tag was doing because it wasn't script. So the template tag just gives us a clearer meaning. Handlebars.js is a JavaScript library for converting templates into HTML. So whereas we were doing it with just simple search and replace before, Handlebars will now take care of all of that for you. You'll want to go to handlebars.js.com for a full tutorial. It is based on the original mustache.js library. So why is it called Handlebars and why is mustache called mustache? The tags that we use are curly braces, and when you rotate those 90 degrees, it looks like a handlebar mustache. So how do we use this stuff? Well, you can include the handlebars.js file either from CDN or just download it and include the script tag in your HTML page. So before I show you some code, let's talk about how this works. Well, you're going to create a template element with tags. So template ID equals some name. I just used template here. Type equals text/HTML. Now within that template element, you put whatever other HTML you want and include these little tags with some unique identifier like name or film ID or genres or whatever. Just include those however you want. Once you have those, you're going to read that HTML from the template element. You're then going to create an object literal with the property name that matches that token that you created in the template element. You pass in that HTML that you read from the template element, you pass it to the compile method of the handlebars object. This gives you a pointer back to a function that I'm going to put into a variable called template. You're then going to call that template function, passing in that object literal that contains all the same names of the tokens or tags you have in that template, and it will then generate the HTML for you. So it does the search and replace type of work. And then you put that wherever you're going to put it. So let's take a look at manipulating the DOM using handlebars.js. In this first HTML file, down here in the main, I've got an input ID equals name, and it has a value filled in of young Frankenstein. Then I've got the button that we click on. That's going to call a function called display data. And you can see on line 26, I've got a div with an ID of output. Next, on line 32 through 36, I've got a template element, has an ID of template, and the type is text/HTML. Inside of there, I've got one label, has a class style applied, so movie info, that's going to put it in bold. And then there's our tag, open curly braces, name, close curly braces. What we're going to do is we're going to, on line 39, include our handlebars.min.js. So I downloaded handlebars and put it into my script folder, so you can see it there. Then in the display data, I'm going to create an object literal that has a name property, and I'm going to set that by getting the value from the name input. Now, remember that the name here on line 50 must be the same as one of the tokens in your template. So you can see that here on line 34. They are the same name. As long as you have those lined up, everything else is going to work just like magic. We then let HTML equals get that template element.inner HTML. So we're going to get the inner HTML, which is the label, class, movie info, the tag, and the closing label element tag. We then call handlebars.compile, passing in that HTML, which gives us back a pointer to a function. Put that into a variable called template. We then pass that movie object literal that has the data in it to the template function, and that returns us the HTML all expanded out, which we then put into that div called output. So let's go ahead and run this, and we can see we're getting what we expect. We are getting a label with that name replaced. Well, let's talk about some other things that we can do with these tags. There's these special tags called helpers. So these helpers, you have a pound sign before some sort of keyword. In this case, we're going to talk about the if. So hash if, right, pound sign if, within our token, and then you give it some property name in your object literal that you're passing in to that compile. And then you put whatever you're going to put inside of this if, and then the closing if is a /if. So if you've got a pound sign if, you must have a closing if. If that is active property is truthy, the value in the name property is omitted. If the is active property is falsy, nothing is emitted. Now you can also use comments within your template. So that's another type of helper. This one starts with just a single exclamation point, and then you put whatever you want. So let's take a look at using this #if helper in Handlebars.js. In this HTML, I've got the same input, I've got the same button, I've got the same div for displaying the output. But if we take a look at the template, we see that now inside of here, I'm using a comment, so just to show you what a comment helper looks like. Then I've got the #if and name. I'm going to look at that name token, right? Or name tag, whatever you want to call it. And if it's truthy, then the label with the class, movie info, and the name is actually going to be put out in that label. And then I have a /if to end that. Now, down here in the display data, this is all the same. Nothing changes. So let movie equals, and then I've got a name property, get value from the name. So I'm getting the input, right? I'm then reading the template element with those handlebars, expressions, tokens, helpers, everything in there. I then pass that HTML to the handlebars.compile method that returns to me this template function. I then pass the movie literal object to the template function, and it returns the appropriate HTML. Let's go ahead and run this. If I have nothing in here, we get nothing. If I put some data in here, we get the label spit out because now that's a truthy value. What goes typically along with the if is an else. So we also have an else helper, and it looks like this. So I do the #if, and then if it finds the tag else, it knows that that's the alternative thing to output, right? So in this case, no movie input. So if the name property is truthy, the value in name is emitted. If the name property is falsy, the text no movie name is emitted within that label. So let's take a look at how the #if and else helpers work in Handlebars.js. Once again, same exact form we had. So I've got input for name, and I've got a button, and I've got an output. But now let's take a look here at the template. So in the template, now I've got the label, but inside of the labels where I've now got all of my helpers. So in this case, I've got a comment again. I then have the #if name. So we're checking to see if name is truthy. If it is, we're going to spit out name. I've got another comment. I then have the else, and then no movie input. And then we have the /if to close off this if-else statement. Down here, display data hasn't changed. Now, isn't this nice? As you add different things, you're not having to write any additional JavaScript code. That stuff all stays the same. Let's run this one. So now you can see no movie input gets displayed within the label. If I put something else in here, we get the name of the movie. What's really neat about using handlebars is that the code doesn't change. I can add as many elements as I want. I'm not limited to just a single tag. I can add as many tags in that template element as I want. Each tag that matches to a property in the object literal is then rendered. So let's take a look at putting multiple expressions in a handlebars template. If we take a look at my main element now, you can see I've got a lot of things in here. I've got an input for the name. I've got a select statement. So I've got a select element for the ratings. I've got a genre. I've got a year. I've got a price. I then have my button and I've got my output area. Let's now take a look at the template. So the template is now changed quite a bit. I'm still using the hash if and the name on the name and the else and the closing if for the first label. After that, I've just added a bunch of other labels here with some different tokens or tags that I wish to have it replace. So now the only thing I have to change now is my object literal. I want to make sure that name lines up with name, rating lines up with rating, genre lines up with genre, year lines up with year, and price lines up with price. By doing all of that, again, the code down here from lines 85 down to 92 does not change. It all has to do with what's in your object that you're saying, I've got all the pieces in this object literal to match up to all of the tokens or all the tags that I'm using in my template. Let's go ahead and run this. We display it, and there we go. There's all the different labels. The first label has that style applied to it, so it comes out in a bolder font. One of the things you may have noticed in the output is that the price came out with just 3.99. I'd like it to come out formatted as US currency in this case. So what I'm going to have to do that is I need to register a custom helper. Remember we saw the hash if helper. I'm now going to build my own helper, and I'm going to do that by using the register helper method on handlebars object. I'm going to provide it with a name. The first parameter passed in is the name, and I'm going to call it US-currency. The second parameter then is whatever function I want to create to accomplish this formatting. So in this case, I'm going to have a function that I'm going to pass a value into, and I'm going to simply return toCurrency value. And I've written a little toCurrency function in a common.js file that we're going to use to take that value, whatever that value is, and return it as US formatted currency. So let's take a look at displaying price as currency. So again, my inputs haven't changed. They're exactly the same as the last example where I've got the name, I've got the select for the ratings, I've got the genre, year, price, button, and the output. Now, look down here on lines 65 and 66. I've got a little comment there. I'm placing the helper name before the property name. So I'm just kind of telling you what I'm doing there. In this tag, I have open curly braces. I then specify the name of my helper that I'm registering with handlebars. So in this case, US-currency. Then you put the name of the property that's going to be in our object literal. That takes that value, price, and it passes it then to the function. So down here, you can see now on lines 79 through 81, I do a handlebars.registerHelper, passing in the name US-currency. So that name has to match up with the one that you're using within your tag. Then you write a function to which a single value is passed, and then you return whatever you want to return. Now this toCurrency, if we look over here in common.js, you can see it right here, and it just simply converts that value to a number, uses the toLocale string, specifying English, US, style of currency, and I want to have it returned in US dollars. So there is my handlebars.registerHelper. So that helper's been registered. After this, again, the code is all the same. We create our movie object with all of the inputs coming in, including the price, but the price right now is unformatted. But when it runs through that compile cycle, it notices, oh, hey, I've got this US currency thing. Oh, I've got a helper that's been registered. It's all good. When you call the template function, you pass in that object, it knows then to call that toCurrency and return that value formatted. So if we run this now, we display the data, we can now see that $3.99 comes out in US currency format. In this lesson, we learned to use Handlebars.js. We used helpers to control what is dynamically generated, and we even formatted data to be generated by building our own custom helper. Coming up next, utilizing Handlebars.js for templating lists and tables.